All right, so the aforementioned list of people, and me, we are Texel. I'm Sam Weinrot, and I've been doing stuff in the Philly Bitcoin and blockchain community since I moved back here from Portland in 2012. We used to have Bitcoin meetups by the Pizza Hut in 30th Street Station. It was, yeah, that's where we became friends, Eric and I. It was a really funny scene. We would pull all those chairs together in a big circle and talk about Bitcoin until the price plummeted, and then we didn't meet for like a year. So, but still working on it. So, and in the intervening time, a lot has changed. A lot has happened. A lot of different things have been built on blockchains. Price has changed. Everything has changed. And that brings us to January 13th, 2018. One of my fellow organizers of Bitcoin PHL, Jason DeLuzio, was nice enough to bring me to the Rare Digital Art Festival in New York, which made headlines for an $150,000 CryptoKitty sale at auction. And Mark and I were in the room watching that happen. I personally bid, I think I bid $10,000 on an aluminum foil kitty hat at one point, and was promptly outbid. So it was a crazy scene, and in the room were there were the designers of CryptoPunks, which are these 8 guys you see here. This is actually my personal collection of CryptoPunks I'm sharing with you here. I have no idea how much they're worth now. I paid way too much for them. But I think my favorite is one of these purple guys. But all right, so those are my and CryptoPunks. So what they are is a randomized. Each feature is randomized, and they created, I think, 10,000 punks and put them up on a web page and auctioned them off, and they sold, for varying values over time. And it's really cool. We took a lot of inspiration from the kind of design of their platform. So that's a good thing to check out. There was also Decentraland, which you may have heard of. They had the mana currency, and then the Decentraland. Decentraland itself, right, is a virtual space. You can buy land, develop it, do what you want. I think there's a red light district in Decentraland, I heard. So check that out at your own risk. And then there were the guys from Rare Pepe were there. This guy Joe Looney, who I think was one of the designers, and this Homer Pepe card sold for $15K, I think, at auction. Like 30K. Everything was denominated in Pepe cash, so it was like kind of hard to keep track of what the values were. And then of course there was CryptoKitties, and they actually did not present at the festival, but the Kitty Hats guys did, which was an add-on for CryptoKitties where you could associate a hat token with your cat token, and your cat would wear the hat. So accessories to the kitties, and I think they were hoping that more people would make accessories. So if anybody wants to make like kitty wagons or something, I'm sure. I don't know how big the community is these days, but so while I was there, I had the tremendous good fortune to meet Mark, who's great, and we started talking afterward because well, first of all, because he was living in Glenside, which is where I'm from, and second of all, because we went out for beers afterward, and third of all, because during the talk, someone had yelled "Crypto Roses." Someone was talking about like a girlfriend or a partner or something, and then someone else was, I think it was like "Crypto Tulips." We said, "Haha, we're gonna do that." And so we're sitting at so this is kind of the scene there. There's DJ Pepe on the stage. It was this cardboard cutout that later sold as a token to someone. It was a guy who was like over here on a mic talking through the stage, like just goofing off. And but so we're sitting afterward next to like all these blockchain personalities at this Creole restaurant in New York with this. They're trying to like stow this cardboard DJ Pepe thing, and the restaurant doesn't understand. The guy's trying to sell it off to anyone at the table who will take it. And Mark and I started to conceptualize of crypto. At the time, we were calling it crypto tulips. And so our idea with crypto tulips was to kind of combine, crypto kitties and Decentraland, some of the ideas behind both of them, by having the genetic, basis for each tulip, just like a kitty, but then adding a geographic wrinkle to the game where instead of finding another breeder and saying, okay, here, let's swap kitties, you have to plant your tulip next to another one. And we were kind of picturing, maybe a yellow tulip breeding region, different sorts of things that might emerge from that idea. And, in broad strokes. So in that process, we were thinking about names, we were thinking about the Netherlands a lot, and we found this island off the northern coast of the Netherlands. It's called Texel. And this is a little video that we saw that was on Vimeo of the tulip fields in Texel. So we took our name from this island. It has a really pleasing shape. It's kind of like Madagascar. And that's going to be the map for our game on which you can plant your tulips and breed them with other tulips. But yeah, there's the beautiful tulip fields in Texel. Maybe one day we'll be there. But for now, to practice some of our ideas about gameplay and to refine some of the underlying stack, we've built I would say a reduced version of tulips, and it's just called Tiles. And what Tiles is instead of the island of Texel, it's a 64 by 64 grid. And instead of tulips, you have paints. Instead of plots, they're the tiles. So you can rent a tile, you can paint a tile, and each player that joins the game starts with red, green, and blue, which they can then augment their palette by painting tiles and mixing with adjacent squares. Sort of like the tulip breeding, but just very simple. Instead of breeding a whole tulip, just mixing two colors. And we're going to have a demo of that later. One thing to note, that came from a desire to learn about the gameplay and like how to properly reward different activities within the game. For instance, so in tulips, we're going to have the Texel Horticultural Society, which will pay out for rare tulips and different types of gameplay. And so we're going to be able to practice a lot of those things with this tile setup. And if anyone saw on Reddit, like, 2 years ago, they did r/place. Yeah. And this is a lot like that. Every Redditor got to paint 1 pixel of this grid every 15 seconds or so? 15 seconds? It's really short. Some amount of time. So you'll see. It looks like that. So now I'm going to pass it off to Mark, and he's going to talk a little bit about the artistic underpinnings of our project. And
well, that was a very good intro. Thank you. Does this do anything? Oh, okay, cool. All right, good. It makes me feel pretty important. So I, as Sam mentioned, this kind of kicked off at that Rare Art Festival, which was really cool because I think it set the ethos for what our team is about, which is kind of a cool cross-section of people that care about artistic things and weird things and technology. And blockchain is kind of a magnet for that. So maybe you guys are in the same space. Like you get why interesting technology can do what it can do in realms that are not just tech-based. It can empower really interesting art. It can empower really interesting social progress. And I think that's kind of where we are. All of us on the team have a variety of interests, and I think that informs what we're doing in a pretty cool way. On the art side, so I'm a web guy and a designer by trade. and I like to think I'm an artist in some capacity. So I'm pretty inspired by the traditions of all kinds of art. And when we started talking about what could be possible with blockchain stuff and the tulip metaphor, the most intriguing thing was all the art that went into what the history of tulips have meant to society. And I won't go real deep into it. Go down a wormhole on Wikipedia if you want to know more about this. But there was a tulip bubble in the Netherlands in the 1600s, around Shakespearean time. And kind of, Sam didn't mention this, but it's kind of one other kind of jokey aspect to this is that we're kind of referencing the way Bitcoin and other currencies have been seen, which is it real? Is it ephemeral? You know, there's an artistic even aspect to that. What is value? You know, but part of that was the creation of this awesome artwork around rare, interesting tulips, because tulips were like currency in those days, and for a short period of time, like 20 years. They were beautiful currency, and I'll show you some images in a second. But the tulip is a great metaphor for what we can do. It's expressive. There's so many varieties of colors, of shapes, of bloom styles. There are these weird, cool viruses that can infect the tulip, and normally that sounds bad, but it actually creates these amazing patterns and designs in a tulip. So if we can recreate those algorithmically, we can generate and pass on through DNA, virtual DNA, and inheritance, really interesting emergent designs for these tulips. So it's like this really cool, compact metaphor for a really cool art project that has digital expression. So here are some examples of, this is the Semper Augustus tulip, probably the most valuable tulip ever, from 1610 or so in Holland, right before the crash. This was like people could buy a house with a bulb of one of these. And then after there was a crash in this tulip bubble, it was worthless. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But they're beautiful, and I think they can recreate them today, but you can't create this exact breed anymore because it's gone now. You can't recreate this genetically anymore. So what we did was did some work on, as Sam said, we thought about this in a variety of ways. How could we build up to the world of space, virtual space, where you could plant tulips that were inheriting characteristics stored in the blockchain and were non-fungible? So to do that, one of the ideas was, could we create this really interesting expression of what a digital tulip was? And we built a generator that could just generate, it's not blockchain based, it's not a tokenized thing yet, but it just generates random tulips with different blooms, different gradient patterns, different orientations, and then it does some fun stuff like it puts them on this parchment layer and it gives them a randomized like Latin name, and it puts a QR code with some of their genetic profile in the background, just for fun, you know, just to kind of get us on the map, you know, on the roadmap towards what we wanted to build. And this is actually a thing you can play with on our site. So if you go to, actually maybe I can just, it's probably easier to, here's a video, but if you go to the Texel website, you can play with this generator, sit there and reload it, and see randomized tulips that have never existed before. Yep. So this is just all, you know, if you like it, save the image because it'll never show up again. They're very cool. So I don't know how to stop it now. There we go. Right?
That's the play button arrow, right? Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to stop being a presenter and start being a computer user. Okay. So check that out on texel.space. There's a link to that. And that's enough about art for now. We wanted to kind of give you a chance to learn more about the architecture and some of the details behind how we're building what we're building in Tiles.
Yeah.
Talk about that, Eric?
Yeah, can you pull up the code base on it real quick?
Yeah, the actual code.
Yeah. Yeah, the architecture of the app is kind of, I guess, like non-intuitive in sense of, like, okay, when we're trying to build like normal apps, we have a traditional database, which is really fast and we can put as much as we want on it. But now we're kind of in the realm of using the Ethereum blockchain as our really slow database. So that's kind of like what I wanted to talk about today was basically we have to be able to say, oh, okay, I want to be able to create a non-fungible token. What does that mean? That means that in terms of when Mark was creating a never before seen piece of artwork, whether it be algorithmically generated or generated in any way, and you wanted to basically say I owned it. So that's kind of like the trope that we've been exploring when it comes down to Ethereum and the digital marketplace. So it's like we mentioned a lot of our influence came from Decentraland and CryptoKitties, and what that means is that if we can actually bring up the website. Say again? Cool. So basically, we can see right here is that we have almost like a Reddit place style board going on here. And what we did is that the architecture of the app is based on, this is the tiles game. And what we did was when we are looking at a pixel, it's really we're representing, each pixel represents as a place to literally rent. So I could be like, oh, okay, this is my like mixing area that I was trying to like get more colors, because I initially started with only 3 colors. So I'm like, okay, I gotta create a plot bed so I can like generate all these other colors so I can gain more tokens. So it's kind of works in such a way where we're not using the token to like, oh, I bought some Texel tulips or I bought some Texel tiles. Really what it is that I started out with red, green, and blue. And what I started to do was aggregate it in my small plot down here that I bought so I can create more genetically differentiating. Now, I own that in my wallet. So I have the ability to paint or plant yellow, purple, mauve, and there's like other different colors that now I have the ability to use. But the novelty associated with this is that, one, if you're saying that I own it, that means you have to either, to paint on my tile, you have to pay me double what I rented it for. We haven't really, that's what the number is right now. But the thing is that this right here, if everybody wants to, go and rent a tile, then we have the ability to like say, oh no, I actually don't want to sell it, and I want to just continue creating my own image on there. So really what it comes down to is that we used, like in terms of architecture, the Ethereum blockchain, there's 64 by 64, so that's 4,096 tiles. So each one of them is ownable. And that if you really look at the back end of it, you'll be able to see that this whole chunk, I own it to my Ethereum address, and no one else can actually rent on there or do anything on that digital space, which is interesting because even if my website goes down and it crashes, it's still up there on the Ethereum blockchain and it's there forever. Like, it's signed there. And that really what's interesting is that I just boot my server back up and it's kind of like stateless. So all the actual database work is stored there and I paid for it. I think like right now if I pay for it, it's around like 1 penny for me to like paint a pixel. So we try to keep the price down so people would feel obliged to like, okay, I want to actually put my company's logo up there, or if I wanted to just like make a Mario piece, it doesn't cost like $1 billion to do that. And you have questions? I saw you had a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate it. So
sure.
Actually building, it's like I could create my own scene.
Yeah.
Whatever I wanted on there.
And it stays there for the life of like exactly how for the life of the project.
Should we quickly explain like how just the basic rules of the tiles game? Like you kind of alluded to it, but
yes, I mean, do you want to talk about that?
I can give it 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So basically, on your board, you're allowed to. Each of these tiles, as Eric said, is tokenized, or excuse me, each of these tiles is rentable. So if you click on one, it'll cost you a certain amount of Ethereum, or excuse me, a certain amount of Ether to rent a tile. And once you rent it, it's yours for a certain amount of time. And then any colors that you own, and you start with 3, R, G, and B, red, green, and blue, you can put in that square during that amount of time. Then, whoever your neighbors are, when that amount of time is up, and what does that correspond to right now? It's like,
I think we have it arbitrary.
it's arbitrary right now, but we were talking about like, there's a certain length of time, and then we'll do a mix event at a predetermined time, and if you put a red next to a blue, the mix will provide you with a randomized shade of something in the world where those two colors would combine, and some type of purple would end up in your palette. And then you own that forever. So that adds to your palette forever. You can keep renting tiles, and now you have purple to use. You could even sell that purple to somebody else. And if it's a shade no one's seen before, it's kind of cool. So we're building up this interesting kind of, we're seeing how many kind of weird colors and weird emergent things we can create with this model. Yeah.
I just realized you're putting an image on a blockchain, which is relatively low. How big does this go? Is this like 1,000 by 1,000?
No. You're seeing the whole thing right now.
Is this the entire?
That's the whole board.
Yeah. And
Is it going to get bigger, or is this pretty much?
You could have multiple boards.
I think for tiles, it'll probably stay like this. For Texel, it'll be a larger. For the tulips,
We're gonna actually have a map of
Yeah.
text.
That's like how many pixels overall would that be?
Well, I guess it wouldn't be pixels.
It wouldn't
A
be
lot of what we
squares.
do-
How many squares would that be?
Well, I think that
So the point of this tiles project is really to firm up a lot of these numbers. So this is a reduction of the overall project, right? Like a paint is a tulip, a tile is a plot, the grid is the island. Okay, it is really important what those numbers are for gameplay. To have anyone think they have a chance in hell of making any money playing the game potentially. It's really important for that stuff to be right. And also the way that contracts work, I learned this from the CryptoPunks guys actually at the festival. We're talking about how they pushed up a version and realized there was a bug in their auction code, in their contract. And once you push your contract to the blockchain, that's it. If you want to be interacting with that contract and you want the actions that people have taken from now, from the time that's been up to continue to mean anything, that's the contract you're working with. Unless you're going to convince every single person on there to migrate to a new chain. So we really don't want to push anything up. Like this is operating on Ropsten. For a lot of reasons, I don't want to be paying 0.01 Ether every time I'm practicing.
Clearly, that's a test network, right?
Yes, this is so. I'm sorry, we have been talking with this slime, all day. So yes, Ropsten is a testnet. It's actually faster than the regular blockchain, a lot less secure. You can get the Ether for free if you want to test. But yeah, a lot of the gameplay is still up for debate and for discovery. Part of this is to see, is this fun? Do we want to paint on this 64 by 64 grid? Like, what do we care about? I actually like having a bunch of colors in my palette. It feels great. I'm sorry I can't show it to you. My computer's over there, but.
The question is it a one-to-one proto version of Texel? Like, will you have a library of tulips the same way that you have a library of colors in this?
Yeah.
And when you say you could sell a color, so you could sell a tulip, like strain? Yes.
Yes, in the same way that you have a wallet. Like literally, these paints live in your MetaMask wallet. I could transfer you my favorite shade of purple, and then I wouldn't be able to paint anymore. Similarly,
They're
tulips.
non-fungible tokens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we haven't I'm going to put Andy on, and he can talk about more of the code behind this and the standards. But the big standard is ERC 721 is the non-fungible token, and I think that I think some people have done some more work in the interim on those standards. So there are a few more options, but
Could you
Are
ever
we-
license them?
is Andy ready?
Andy is
Could-
ready.
Could you ever, instead of selling the tulips, could you ever evolve into a situation where you could sell them or just license the rights to them so that I could take your tulip, merge it with my tulip to create a color? You get to keep your original one, I get to keep my original one, and now I've got a third one?
That's actually how it would work, just as it stands in our mind's
Just
eye,
by
I would
being
say.
adjacent, they would be.
Yeah, so similar, if I chose to mix, this blue tile here, I would have a chance of getting another blue, or I might get a green, and it would repaint this tile as a green.
But it would only be with tulips that are adjacent to me.
So currently tiles is purely the 8 neighbors.
Right.
That's the only way you can mix. But with tulips, we could play with that notion. I mean, there are a lot of ideas, and it's not built yet. So I could tell you a few. Like, one idea is that we could be monitoring the weather on the actual island of Texel and the wind patterns, and you might get pollinated by a tulip from the southern tip of the island because there was a really strong breeze in the Netherlands that day. Or the temperature could change the fertility of your tulip and, change the yield of bulbs. But a lot of this is still in the realm of, we will determine this. And that's why we built this, to really play with the numbers involved. See, when do we want tulips to actually have the mixing event, Is it a time thing? Do you wait? I remember waiting while my Tamagotchi grew. That's kind of fun. Do we? There are lots of things to discuss.
One more thing to think about too is that once it's on the blockchain, we're just one way to the Texel game is just one way to express and interpret what you have on the blockchain.
If we could have the honor of someone else building
Someone else could-
a view.
Once you have your tulips it's on the blockchain, you could decide privately to create another way to express that and have another set of rules. It's just a universal thing that you own in a readable format that's understood and accepted by anybody. So if you want to create a game where you could license it, that's your purview too.
Yeah.
That's kind of what makes blockchain so interesting as a social experiment.
And I'm not sure if this is exactly what was meant, but I mean, the CryptoPunks guys even talked about how some of the nicer, more desirable punks might be so awesome that the owner of that punk could make T-shirts or something. It's kind of silly, but but the idea that this punk is a work of art, and now because I own this punk, that could be my logo. I go slap it up all over Decentraland or whatever I want to do. And similarly we've thought about, actually the guy who came up who led us to the island of Texel is a local engineer who we talked to about making some 3D models of tulips to put in Decentraland. So there are lots of things that you can do in this space, and I think, the analogy that I like to look at these technologies, has anyone read the Michael Pollan book, The Botany of Desire? He's the guy who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma, which kind of touched off America's fascination with anti-corn and actually paying more attention to our gut health. But this book, The Botany of Desire, is about 4 plants: potatoes, marijuana, apples, and tulips. And it looks at the plants as it looks at life from the plant's perspective, and it looks at their effect on humans from the plant's perspective, because we really look at plants as though we dominate them and they are our our tools, and we plant them, and we tell them how to be. But the book kind of takes the perspective that these plants are exerting some type of control on us. That potatoes exerted some type of control on Ireland. That Johnny Appleseed was actually planting apple trees so people could have potable water, and so how apples really played this role in the development of America, and then of course tulips about the bubble, and so similarly, right? You might not see the connection immediately, but I think of blockchain technologies and their relationship to humans. I like to look at it from the blockchain's perspective. Just like you could think that plants are manipulating us to cultivate them, Bitcoin has manipulated us to cultivate it. So there are all these computers all over the world, and they're mining Bitcoin because the incentive structure was right. And so when you ask us about the numbers, and I tell you I don't know, it's because it's really important that they be right. Because if they're not right, then we can't encourage humans to do anything. So the incentive structure has to be right, and we're making a game, but businesses are just incentive structures. So if you can properly encode incentive structures into the blockchain, then you can build a lot more interesting things. The trouble is the gateways and the verification of things in the real world. That's like a real hurdle.
So, who are the customers that you're targeting who will be interested in participating in either this game or eventually Tulip?
I don't think we are completely sure yet. I think we have an idea that it's some of the folks who were in that room in January. I think this is also very much an exploration for us. And, if we can build this, there's lots of other stuff we can build. It's not. So it's not an end in itself. But it is a project that we can say, this is what it is, and this is how we build it. And do that.
Real quick on that, you mentioned customers. I think of this a little bit, and I mentioned this before. I think our team has this weird, chaotic artistic streak, and maybe it's not customers, maybe it's just viewers, maybe it's participants in an art piece. We don't know. Like we definitely don't have a financial kind of end game for this. It's just kind of a fun and intriguing thing that you could only do in this moment that you could have never done before. So that's kind of an inspiring thing in a way. And I think it's drawn together a weird crew of people to make it. And hopefully it'll draw together just that kind of a weird audience too.
So I want to,
Okay.
we're keeping our buddy in Portland on the line. So I'm gonna hop over to his Twitch stream here. I want to put a quick. Oh, we're gonna watch this ad.
Andy was ready to mature.
Yeah, Andy's gonna get all of this money.
Sam, do we need audio for this part?
Unmute the
It's coming out of this though.
It's on HDMI, isn't it?
Well, let's see how loud we can get him.
I'm not sure it's going to work through the TV.
No, it's coming out of the laptop.
Just Cause 4, available now.
Yeah.
Maybe that's loud enough?
Here he is. Let's see. Yeah, we can hear him. Andy.
Just Cause 4.
Oh, and we're echoing.
Hello, hello.
Can you guys hear me?
And we're echoing. All right.
Alright, hi, how is everybody doing?
What's up?
It's a little bit weird for me. I don't get any audio feedback from you because you have it muted, Sam. But if we don't have it muted, I get feedback, so that's okay. I'll just speak like this, and then I'll take a break in a second. And if you guys have any questions, you can ask. So I'm in California. First of all, my name is Andy. I'm one of Sam's friends from college. And I was brought on a couple of months after the inception of the project as a Solidity or blockchain coder. And I was brought on to do the contracts initially. And since then, we've really just collaborated a lot together. I've done most of the actual physical coding for all of the tiles that you see here. So if I have tiles here, we can kind of look at it for a second. Let's see. I mean, I briefly wanted to run down some of the technologies that we used in order to build this app and some of the technologies that we'll likely use moving forward with Tulips. The first one being Truffle, obviously. It's a way of compiling our contracts. It's a way of getting everything from contract to stored on the blockchain. And then once we have it stored on the blockchain, we can access it from the front end. And we do that with something that Truffle has also developed called Drizzle. And Drizzle's amazing. Drizzle allows you to do some pretty simple things like making contract calls using actual React components. So you can basically set up really simple Drizzle config file, Drizzle options, and you can just see. I add our contract, I tell it where to look for the network, and I do a couple of events. And that alone, once you get all your Drizzle set up, allows you to do some pretty cool things. So what we're looking at right here is the board component. So if we see here, this is the board component. So you have like a rules, you got board, and board is not doing much. We're doing some updating whenever we get some new tiles rented or tiles painted. We're doing some contract calls that allows us to check whether or not we, what the number of tiles rented and tiles painted are. If you see down here in the lower left, they're not, it's more of a serial number right now for the board, but this is actually the total number of rented tiles and the total number of painted tiles. And as this number changes, we trigger updates. And one of the cool things about this project that we've learned that has really, I think it's going to help carry over, is connecting our back end to the front end so that we don't have to make a zillion contract calls to load this board state. So we do something was pretty interesting. We did it over the last couple of weeks, and we're able to store the cache the board state to our server. And this is just looking at the it's looking at the get node, and it's just checking to see if anything comes down the pipeline that is an event for our contract. So if a tile is rented or a tile is painted, it gets picked up by this publisher and is sent over to the front end. And that is something that we spent a great deal of time working on, and it's really quite great. I was asked also if I would talk you guys through, I'm not sure if Eric went over how to set up the whole MetaMask and Ropsten and everything, just so that you could actually do the demo of our tile game. Would you unmute me for a second, Sam, so that or at least maybe give me some feedback on what that looks like?
He's on a delay, so.
Would you unmute me for a second?
Hey, Andy, nobody has laptops in the room. We don't have to do it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any questions, I can't hear anyone with the mute, so maybe you can just type them out to me, Sam. Or, I mean, if anyone has any questions on the technologies themselves, I don't want to bore anyone, and I'm not sure what the interest is in the room. So, yeah, do you guys want to know more about some of the technologies?
I'm curious, I know you're on a test net, but let's say per pixel, let's say you just want to buy a pixel off the Ethereum blockchain, how much would that cost you per pixel, and then I guess the rent difference?
Yeah, perfect. You type them out for me, Sam, and I'll see if I can answer a couple questions.
I'm just curious, like once it's on the official blockchain, what's kind of the cost that?
Oh, what is the cost that we're thinking of?
Yeah, we're like
Second one thing, which is USD like 10 cents.
so
But I think you can get it down to actually if the contract falls up to 3 cents.
okay. So let's say if you wanted like a 10 by 10 plot, how much would that cost you to buy?
10 by 10, if you did that like 100 times 10 cents, that's $1.
$1, okay. But obviously it depends on the market prices.
No, I think that's I think that we store a lot. We store a lot of them.
So you don't charge for them, it's just the gas that it
We
costs.
charge like a very small investment.
for Tulips, we'll charge a small amount that will go to the Horticultural Society because we want there to be gameplay.
Yeah.
The Horticultural Society will award the rarest tulips of the generation.
There's also lotteries that we have in play. So it's like just being able to play the game, you'll be able to like win a small amount of the accrued pot, as it were.
And like for tiles, I mean, things we can play with, ideas that we've had. Did anyone play Kid Pix as a kid? It was on the old Macs, and it was a drawing game, and you could erase what you drew with these silly, like, bomb erasers, or like all these, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Kind of like an Etch-a-Sketch, yeah. I mean, but like a Mac Etch-a-Sketch, and but similarly, we thought about having like a color bomb, like with a radius, so you could like, maybe you happen to rent the Daily Double Square or whatever, right? And then you get a token which is a mix bomb, and if you drop it on a 5x5, it will just mix everything and totally ruin someone's art. I think that's pretty funny to me.
Yeah, it does have an adversarial, good-natured adversarial.
See that tool terrorist.
Well, Tulips is a little different. We'll play with this until we're bored, and we'll be building Tulips.
I'm curious about that caching layer that you're running in the background. So Andy talked about communicating with Geth for that. So are you guys like running a full node yourselves and listening for events on the node? Or are you guys like talking to Infura or something like that?
No, we were actually, here is very, because it's asking for something, the information. Yeah, Infura is very useful if you don't have a Geth node running locally, and actually it's actually way faster if you just subscribed off of the topics or the logs. So there's a Kekik function, Kekik 256, that allows you to take any function that you run in Ethereum and then wrap it, and then you can pass the hash and be able to look at it. So we have 3 events that are like that tell the Ethereum blockchain when we actually paint a tile or when we rent a tile, and those are actually, yeah, you can see it right here. So yeah, that's great. Thanks, Andy. Basically, right here.
These are mute assistants.
Yeah, so you can see right here that on the screen we have Web3 is the JavaScript library that we're using, and we are.
Like a Node.js backend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it basically picks up on the idea that we try to save a little space by having one integer value for the tile. So you can put in what number tile that you're at, and you'll get the XY coordinate. So you save a little bit of space that way. But you can see that if you see around on data function, you can see that we're actually publishing it to a Redis cluster. So that's our caching. So we actually take in all the events and we push it to there. And we'll be able to then create then a JSON file, which will be easily read from the internet.
But so you're running your own full node to do this.
Mm-hmm. But even that's a little slow if you're doing it live. So that's why we cache it, because it's like beforehand we had this like I guess it's.
Do you have an old version you can run to show how slow the board load is?
Yeah, can you run the local version from like a couple versions back, maybe?
Do you guys have to run an archive node to do that, or can you?
Yes, it's a full node. Yeah.
The slow one. We can't hear you. Hold on.
No, we do run a full node,
Here, let's listen.
which is something that I've talked about. If you guys had heard of Thomas J. Rush, he does a lot of the other meetups. Him and I have talked a lot about that, and a lot of what the future of our applications are going to be is that since memory and storage is going to be much cheaper, that you're going to be able to have an entire node on your phone or your home computer de facto. So basically, there's not going to be no more going out to the internet, but basically a lot of the internet that we're going to be trusted is going to be living on your computer already, and then looking to it.
Is Andy presenting to us right now?
I think he's talking, but we're not doing it.
Let's turn him up. All right.
Sorry, Andy.
The board would take approximately 3 minutes.
Oh no.
And now you see the
Yeah.
way we've cached it is.
He's just talking about
it's
speeding it up.
obviously much faster.
We'll figure out what he said.
Yeah, and you guys can take it from there. Yep.
Dang.
All right. Well, yeah.
Basically, I think you know what he was saying. He basically was saying that what we did is that what like making a DApp is that we want to make. All right, yeah, that's fine. The juicy bits.
So this is some Redux stuff for asynchronous actions. So it's a Redux asynchronous action. And what we do is all we do is dispatch this action when we know that there's been a change in the board. So Drizzle is constantly looking at our contract state. It's actually doing something which is great for us. It's taking our contract and it's putting it into the local state client side, so that if you were to run a git state, like a store.get state, and look at it, you would see our contract. And so it's looking at that, and if at any point so in other words, it's in the properties, and so I can do comparisons. I can look at the painted tiles count and see if it's changed. If it's changed, go ahead and dispatch set tiles. If you see that the rented tiles count has changed, well then again, go ahead and dispatch set tiles. And again, what you'll see is that it's just making that call to our cached backend, which, if you remember, is just, this is it right here. And it's using those services on our VM. So the DigitalOcean droplet has those services, the pub sub services, that are keeping this fresh. And then our front end just goes ahead and grabs that anytime it loads. So when it loads, it will grab the cache backend and it'll make the board. And whenever there's a change, similarly, it will trigger a GET request to here, and it will update our board.
All right, let's take some more questions. I'm gonna do this mute. This is so silly. So he can hear us. All right, anyone else? Questions?
Okay, how does the color mixing work exactly?
How does the
Like, is
color
it
mixing work?
random
Andy can
or-
actually show you the contract right now. He's going to be on delay there. He's probably pulling it up right now. I'm going to switch him over.
He's going to be on delay there. He's probably pulling it up right now. I'm going to switch him over.
And now he's
Hey guys, yeah, I can walk you through a little bit of the color mixing. It was a little bit of a challenge. I don't know if anyone in the room is familiar with the color space, the possible color spaces that exist. But we went with HSL, and there was a small trig problem that we had to overcome, which is if you think about HSL, it's 360 degrees of hue, and that's a circle. And what you're looking for is not necessarily the average of two colors, but you're looking for the midpoint on its shortest side of the arc length. So if you imagine that you have two arms coming up from the center like clock hands, and you're hitting a hue of 0 and a hue of 120, you want the average to be the midpoint on its arc length. And if you know anything about Solidity, it does not handle floats well. So what I ended up doing was, with some help from the internet and some open source stuff, I was able to concoct this. What this is it's an approximation of trigonometric functions. So you have approximations of pi, approximations of half pi, out to a certain decimal expansion, and it allows us to make pretty accurate hue mixing operations. So you get an initial hue, and this is a library that I wrote. So what you do is you write a library, and then when you want to use it, so like in Texel Mix, you would go ahead and you would import this library. And just getting the true mix of the two colors was not what we wanted. We wanted some randomness and we wanted some uniqueness. So we want to vary more than just the hue. We want to vary some of the lightness, and we want some pseudo-random behavior. Again, if you know anything about contracts, it's difficult, actually it's impossible, to get true randomness, which is just a math problem in general. Randomness is not easy to achieve, but what we did was we achieved pseudo-randomness. So if we look at the mixed color function here, it takes one of a dominant hue and a tertiary hue, and we perform some functions for making sure that we get the short side of the arc length, and then we do the hue mixing. But what's fun is that we actually look at the block number, and a couple other various things with some salt that I mix in to make sure that it's different. For if everyone wanted to mix a color on the same block number, I don't want their random number to be the same. So I increase the salt count, which is just a global global variable that's just ticking up, just to keep a unique random number for everybody. And in that sense, you can get a slight random variation on color, and then also using a similar technique, we can select a random neighbor. So we select a random neighbor, we select the color that it's going to be mixing with, and then we do some random variation on the color. And that's how it's mixed.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, I wanted to dig into the randomness actually. That's my other question.
Okay.
Like, I guess how does the randomness work? And like, let's say in theory this becomes huge and tulips are worth, tons of money, like the cats. What's stopping someone from purposely mining a block or somehow just the contract's published so everyone can see the code. So what's to stop someone from like purposely doing it so that it gets the random result that they want?
So I think there's a difference here between tiles and tulips. Tulips, this kind of random salting may not even be something we do. It makes sense for colors because we want to let them kind of band out. And we might even add like a little bit more of that so that people can eventually maybe get to whites and blacks even. But because right now you're kind of staying within the color wheel and not going on the L, not going on the lightness.
Yeah. You're doing H and S.
Yeah, we're doing H and S, but not L. But with tulips, I mean, there's so much more randomness in each tulip.
It's just more of a general question, like how do you do randomness at all for anything in a way that someone can't?
Well, I think with oracles, so like we were talking about, if we can feed oracles in that, are giving you like the Netherlands weather. So I think it's an oracle problem, and people are building oracles.
There are an oracle problem. There's a lot of non-deterministic things that happen inside of randomness. Like, for instance, we don't know, in the Bitcoin blockchain, that any typical block, what those transactions will be. We don't know what number of people will be
But
spending.
if you're mining the block, you will know, and you can.
Yeah.
But this is something I
Doesn't
involved
CryptoKitties
in.
hide part of their
I'm
genetic?
just curious.
Isn't it?
They do
proprietary?
hide it.
I think that's the answer, right? Like, so for instance, CryptoKitties.
Oh yeah.
CryptoKitties has a breeding aspect to their game, and all of it is in a public contract on the chain, but the part that actually does the genetic mixing is proprietary and it's possible. It's lock and key. So you can't actually see that.
How do they make it proprietary? It's public on the blockchain.
It's not public.
That part of the contract isn't public.
I don't think it's on the blockchain.
Yeah.
I think it's just there. That's on the.
They are calling a mixed genes function. If you really, I did this
Yeah.
once. If you really dig through their code base, eventually you get to this mixed genes function. It's just like, what is that? And you don't know. Yeah, but although there are a bunch of people who have reverse engineered what the algorithm probably is, and which we have used actually, right? We looked at that.
Mixed genes.
There it is.
I don't know. This might be a
So
conversation.
ideally, I would love it if we could have a game that was competitive and public. Now, it's not clear if that's possible,
Have you looked at other blockchains potentially where that is possible?
Like he said, the Oracle, basically what an Oracle is, it's just a service that, if you think of a blockchain, it's self-contained, and so anything that goes on within a blockchain is immutable and it can never be changed. So if you would bring in an Oracle, it'll allow you to use like the regular internet to maybe bring like a dice simulator or to bring some sort of randomness into a deterministic system.
But he's talking about, I think, the genetics.
Well, no, yeah, I get how an oracle would solve that as far as randomness.
Yeah. I suspect it's possible. I don't really see why we couldn't tell people how the genetic mixing algorithm works, as long as it's smart enough. It's kind of like if your students are acing your test, like make a better test. So I think we can I think that we could do that, but it's not easy, definitely. And the genetic part of this project hasn't begun.
All right. I'll have to look at how CryptoGenes does it also.
Yeah, it's that mixed genes function though.
Yeah, it's definitely a study.
But there, I did a little bit of genetic stuff at one point in my life, and I think I'll probably talk to some actual geneticists, but I would like to do some degree of recombination. Generally, we have this set of traits. We'll come up with, a character set, probably like 4 to 6, and then we'll reduce each trait to a 3, right? Right? That's how our DNA works. It's 3, each codon is 3 bases, right? And then those come together to form proteins, and so we will similarly to form amino acids. And so I think we'll try and do something like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I get how the genetic concept works. It's just more like if the blockchain's deterministic, how can you achieve randomness in a way that someone can't purposely mine the result that they want if it was valuable enough?
Well, I'm just not sure what they would be
The randomness
mining here.
will also occur within a band. So, like, if someone wants to really dedicate themselves to it, they could probably. You're right. They could probably create some high probability of getting what they want. But you can do that with tulips too in real life. So, I mean.
CryptoKitties, I believe that's the whole point why people were trying to backwards engineer like that actual algorithms, because you do want to.
Yeah, they want to generate, right? Yeah.
You want to go for that.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not necessarily against the idea that you would have some idea of what you would be able to create, but there will be a little bit of extra sauce in there somehow to make it weird.
I mean, there is something fun about having the strategy change. Right?
Yeah,
like if we release it, maybe it's like, oh, this is the dominant strategy. But if we have enough reward mechanisms that are kind of checking and balancing each other, maybe it can be more exciting.
So I think the problem Matt's referring to is like a specific problem related to people mining blocks. So if you're mining the block, then you're choosing everything that goes into the block, and there's no entropy on chain outside of what is in the block, right? So if you're the creator of the block who's going to execute the contract before it stores the final state, you can just try a bunch of states, manipulate things the way that you want until you get the result that you're desiring. So obviously, like your average user doesn't have that option open to them.
Yeah.
But someone who is, say, running a mining pool or something like that can intentionally mine in such a way such that they have an advantage over other players in the game.
You mean so they could potentially get their tulips planted faster?
Well, they can. I mean, if you're mining a block, you basically see the output of that block. So you see what tulip you would generate, and then you can decide, do I want to publish it or not, and keep going until you get the one that you want, the most rare, most expensive one.
Oh, so you're saying you could not commit?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I call mining. Like you keep trying different ones till you get the one that you want, and then you publish that block.
And there's like lots of things that like you could, so you could like use the a naive attempt would be to like use the hash of the block or the hash of the previous block or something like that. But of course, again, the miner has those things in control. Like they're assembling the block, so they can, any source of entropy that you as a developer could try to introduce into the system, ultimately the miner has some ability to exert control on that. So getting any kind of true random behavior is basically impossible as far as I know without introducing an oracle, like a trusted third-party source. I think that there are techniques that you can use to mitigate it, but ultimately, for situations like this where there's a random aspect, a miner is always going to be able to have some kind of advantage over a normal user. Is that basically?
Yeah. That's sorry.
So you're saying that potentially, if there's a randomness involved in our genetic recombination, so I made, my tulip mates with yours, right? So that determination of, so we don't know quite yet what is going to. Right now, you literally click a button and mixes your compound. For tulips, I think it would probably be a schedule, and it could either be block number or probably block number is simplest. but so let's say the block number, triggers a breeding event, and R2, so mine is next to yours, and it happens, and in the breeding event, it selects yours. So you're saying that if there was a randomness in the recombination of our genetics, and that was going to be published in the block, they could throw it out, like to try and get a different recombination of our two streams.
Well, the argument, like, how do they know what the market's going to want as the most popular? Maybe they see something unusual, but does the miner know what the most artistic one? They look at it and say, well, this looks pretty, but what do other people think? Maybe they think the other color is more pretty. How would a miner judge artistic?
I can see them knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't know how the tulip game's going to be.
Yeah.
If there's a general market for tulip,
I mean, if the color purple was popular, then maybe they aimed to mine only color purple. But it's like generally, some people are going to disagree on what looks valuable or what they like the best.
It's more just a philosophical question.
Exactly, it gets to philosophy. And I think that's our differentiator in a way, is that we're trying to bring in the oddness of what art even is into this. So hopefully that will act as a little counterbalance to the idea of gaming it.
Yeah, I would also, so I brought it up also because there's chains like EOS, when I mentioned it, we considered other chains, and since the block, like not anyone is able to produce a block, you're able to achieve randomness, and the idea is that if one of the block producers were to gain that, and were found out, they would lose their position, so there's incentive not to do that.
What was the chain you wanted to switch to, Eric? Was it
Tron. I was looking at that just because it's a distributed proof of stake and it's faster and cheaper. But I don't know if it's like more sound in terms of investment.
It's a really good consideration. I think it's good.
Yeah, we're looking at other chains simultaneously. Like there's nothing stopping us.
Like, I would love to be able to get it on Bitcoin somehow with
Yeah, as soon as Bitcoin has some smart contract abilities.
Probably a longer discussion, but you can build a layer on top of it.
Yeah,
exactly.
You use counterparty.
Yeah, you kind of, but it just isn't as easy yet. You
And
can't.
it'll be more expensive and slower.
Yeah. So you kind of need lightning. You need lightning to be better, and then maybe counterparty becomes a thing.
Getting less and less costly.
Any other questions?
What is the tulips?
That's a good question. Yeah. So where is a tulip stored? Where is the image stored? So CryptoPunks, it's funny, they discovered when they were doing their project that it is prohibitively expensive to store images on the blockchain, which is probably suspected. And so when you own a CryptoPunk, you really own the coordinates of a punk on their 10,000 punk JPEG that's on their website. Similarly, now what's easier for us though, and is that we can store the it's a code, so the tulip is general. So we're like your tulip viewer software, unfortunately, right? If you really want to own your tulip, like you kind of need our. It's as though you're plugging your wallet in and it's saying, here are your tulips on our website.
You own the DNA, but you don't own the visual tulip. We interpret it for you one way. Someone else might build a viewer that was three-dimensional and could see it a different way with the same data. We could take one of those kind of cool interpretations of the old art style, right, with the parchment background and everything, and throw that onto IPFS and say you own that. But I'm not sure that actually gets at the spirit of what we're talking about, which is actually owning the characteristics, not the piece of visual media.
Yeah, a lot of what was talked about at the art festival where we met was kind of like
it gets philosophical real
what
fast.
are you owning? There was this hardware piece there called Mural, MEURAL, and it was a frame that would display your crypto assets, like your crypto collectibles, so you could put it on your wall and like show your crypto kitties in here. It's funny. Who did I talk to? I was trying to convince the Decentraland guy to make my company, Pirate Printing Company, the official physical reproduction partner rendering, 3D, just 3D print, some, probably just the price per plot or some type of plot stat, and you could kind of have in your hand like a.
Because the tulips seem to be, maybe what the made of in a days.
Oh yeah, we were so, the guy who came up
Happy
with Texel on
Valentine's
our,
Day.
the guy who came up with Texel on our team. Well, he actually was on Team Slide because he just kind of hung out for a few days
Justin?
and then got a job.
Oh, man.
I know. But yeah, we could definitely generate a tulip, a 3D one from the same characteristics to generate the 2D one. It's just another script.
Yeah, and that's like brings up other larger things. Is that right now, if you are playing a game that is very popular, like Fortnite right now, people customize their characters. People go deeper into the game rather than what's just offered to them for free, and that's what people do when they buy assets on in the virtual world, and that's what we're gearing up for. So there's nothing stopping us from saying like, oh, okay, yes, my digital asset is mine and it is unique, and that is a thing that's happening and is a continuously growing market because it literally is a space that is hyper real. It's not real, but it is to us because we are literally giving it value. So that has a very it has a lot of philosophical issues that come with it, but at the same time, that's the world we live in because we live in a digital world. We live in a place where I need to show ownership, I need to show who I am, and we're creating different ways of giving identity to something that's just like to me. But like, okay, I made a 3D representation of my store. Here's my store, and here's all the things that you can buy in real life on it. But that's just not where we're at. So it's harder for us to process or think about. But in reality, we're going to go shopping online. We're going to be doing it in a virtual world. We're going to look and see how it looks on us. We're going to see our other friends talking about it, and we're going to be meeting there online. It's not real, but it is because.
You mean like Ready Player One?
Yeah, definitely. Like a virtual world is coming out, and especially in the world of like augmented reality, because now we're going to project the online reality to our present day, and then we have to show we want to buy things, we want to exchange value.
Are you talking with like Decentraland and CryptoPunks like to be like the florist for?
Yeah, so I was in touch with. I haven't talked to them for a while because I wanted to have like more to show. But I was talking to one of the developers from Decentraland. His name started with a P. He's a really nice guy, actually. He was at that festival, and he was totally. I mean, in the blockchain scene, like it's not big. And if you're like, I want to populate your virtual land with my virtual flowers, they're like, yeah, like he's not gonna say no. So yeah, he was totally into it. But
you got the CryptoPunks all of a sudden, handing out, flowers to each other.
Exactly. Yeah, right. you had to do it. I mean, I thought, you could. Like a dumb idea I had was that if you own a CryptoKitty and a CryptoPunk, you can mash them together and get a new token, and it's a kitty punk. It's just a punk petting a kitty. Like that. But who knows? Maybe that's fun. I don't know.
Is there like overarching social goal? So specifically, like, is there a way where if you create a tool, and say most the rarest tool, right, to where it actually deteriorates the overall field, right? So you're not going to plant specific crops next to each other in real life. Is there a similar aspect of that?
I think we discussed that a little bit about like how one of the metas that you're talking about, like with rarities, that now we're like, oh, well, we have like a plot of these really rare genetics. We want to protect them. So yeah, there's definitely part of that game that's a part of it. There's definitely a lot of issues that come around with like, oh, well, I have these really, I have like, for instance, like the Semper Augustus, and I don't want it to mix with any other genetics. I'm trying to protect that. So definitely.
I wasn't sure I got your question. Did that
Yeah,
get it?
I was thinking more of like, I guess there's two parts, but one that as soon as it becomes available and it's the rarest one, everybody loses interest. Right? There's that possibility.
Oh, you mean so you're saying like just like CryptoKitties releases new seasons of cats, right? So like this season you get a Galaxy cat or whatever. And actually, I'm pretty sure they had a corporate partnership cat. Like I don't think it was a Nike cat, but it was like a there's literally a brand on a crypto. Do you see this?
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing, but I have something else to say. But
I don't remember what. It might have been a sports team. It was really silly, and so, but if tulips, I think the tulips are it's going to be a much larger space, possibility space, in terms of just the different combinations of hues and tilts and like we can even layer the petals differently. You know, like there are the space, the combinatoric space is just really huge. So
Sophisticated.
And-
Sophisticated.
So it could just it could look a lot of different ways, and the trick of designing the horticultural society DApp that will kind of run in the background and monitor the goings on the island is that it will have to adjust its. It would suck if it just thought the same tulip was the best every season, you know. So it has to change based on the rarity and the populations of tulips that have been grown. So it will kind of take into account that we don't have a lot of blue tulips, you know.
Would people be able to vote on their favorites?
These are great. That's great.
These are
We're
really
just talking to the people here that are
good
making it. So
yeah.
it's a good idea.
I'm thinking like I thought of the dog show immediately every year a new dog.
Yeah, there's a
They
balance
vote on it.
between gaming it and you can't let people if it's a monetary prize, which I think was the idea, to get like a blue ribbon.
But it is fun to write right here.
Yeah, but so maybe you get a blue ribbon token and an ether bag, which is just the pot from the island plant feed.
Oracle for the weather sounds good. I just keep on thinking about wine, and you can't mimic
The terroir.
the weather conditions and heat, humidity, etc. in any given season. The 2012 is much better than the freaking 2009 because it's just the weather. So
Depending on the grade.
yeah, exactly. That's it. So hence the mix of the tools.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's that's just that's
Like
cool.
the stunted tulips of the wind of Thursday.
We met at the Rare Art Festival in January. The next event we all went to together was the Philly Flower Show in March.
Yeah.
We went and looked at real tulips and got inspired down there.
Yeah.
And thought about how they award them. People get prizes for certain ones.
That was me.
That was actually kind of like a really cool, instructive part of what we were trying to think of.
That would be. You think about looking up at the Philly Flower Show? I mean,
we talked about having a booth. That would be so fun.
I don't know if everyone would get it, but
I think
like,
give it a shot.
come back. Yeah, here's a digital tulip.
I wanted to ask, is there some consideration or thought about like collective art projects? Let's say 10 people to get together and say, we want this plot. Let's, either they have a little consensus or some type of voting system for their group, and they're going to pool their gas or Ethereum, and they're going to work on their own project, but they're not going to let I guess they would have a pool to kind of, I wouldn't say like a mining pool, but basically like a group that they're working on a project. Is there going to be like little built-in systems for that, or is that they're just going to have to work?
So just like on tiles, you mean?
Well, let's say they want to like where the Mario is. That's maybe like a team of 5 to 10 people, and they're pooling their resources to kind of.
This is
ours.
a couple different people.
But we're working together in our own area.
I did consider that like syndication almost because what happens is like for instance with the example of Reddit Place, that sort of team mentality came out because they were subreddit that was really into Bitcoin made sure that the Bitcoin that was over in the bottom left character was always there, and even though people were trying to paint over it maliciously or like in trolling, that they would keep it there.
Yeah.
I was considering some sort of button like in Discord that you could like click and be a part of a syndicate to be like, okay, we're gonna keep up the picture of Mario, for instance, in this, and if our genetics were favorable, then we would split the pot.
Yeah, because
There's a kind of like I was kind of playing with that idea with the meta of it, and that's kind of like why we wanted to bring it to the group and more groups is because we're trying to figure out what's
What's
the market
fun?
fit. What's the
Yeah.
fun thing?
Because when I see that, I almost see like a 2D version of Minecraft, and like in a 200-player server, there might be a group of like 10 players who kind of shoo the other players away from their house, and they're working on like a castle.
Yeah.
And people come by and say, "Oh, that looks cool." And if somebody comes by and tries to like start breaking down the bricks, they'll come and chase them off. So.
No doubt.
So yeah, I feel like it's the tiles game to me at this point. It's like we have a chessboard and we have all the pieces on it, but we don't know how any of them move, and we don't know what the objective is. So
We're working it out.
you know, yeah.
Because I didn't want to go totally like, oh, we're a lottery game, like like.
But like there could be. I had an idea that we could have a bounty system where you're like, I would love to see this picture appear on Texel, but on tiles, but and I'll put up this bounty. I don't have the time or the colors to paint it. But if this image comes to within these parameters, like the hues are in this range or whatever, but they paint it and they're like, okay, I will, and then the contract could listen for that image to exist on the grid, and if it did, the payout would go to everyone who had contributed to that image.
So like there's like what they call a simulator tile system.
Yeah, where
they redesign the things. If you can make this.
But making it so that people are battling over is definitely what we want. So it's funny. Like there's something funny there and fun that I can see. Where you have to
collaboration aspect come from it, and that's why when we saw Reddit plays, we're like wow, there is the ability for and the inclination that once you give people the space to collaborate, they will.
Like Reddit plays and Twitch plays Pokemon are probably my most favorite.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know what it is, Andy, are you there? Can you pull up a slide of Reddit plays?
There's actually a YouTube you can.
A YouTube video?
Oh, YouTube? I can pull it up.
Later?
One thing.
He hears us, but he doesn't know. Here, hold on.
While he's pulling that up, I'll mention something to your point about like enabling groups of people to pull resources together to like buy colors or tulips or whatever and do things together. One of the interesting properties about Ethereum is that users have accounts and contracts have accounts.
Yeah.
And to other contracts, those things look the same.
Okay.
And can interact with the applications in the same way.
Yeah, so this is an overview of Reddit plays. Not zoomed in, you can see that without any organizational input, people self-organized to their own Reddit place, and they created. You can see there's a lot of Americans, and we're straight in the middle, and that people try to destroy it, and we kept putting it back there. Same with Germany and its international community, and then there's people who are kind of like the anarchists, where they came in and they just made this black dark blob that destroyed everything, and then you have
Penn State.
then you had some absurd stuff going on where a start menu came up to be.
Andy has to sign off. Wait, let me just pause this and let's say goodbye to Andy real quick.
Yeah, so there's no rhyme or reason to what it could be, and I'd rather not say oh, okay, this is what it
Everybody
has to be.
say bye, Andy.
Thanks, Andy.
Bye,
Bye,
Andy.
Andy.
15 seconds later, you'll
Excellent
see his
work.
reaction. Here it comes. It's gonna be really exciting.
I read an article in
Alright, I'm gonna take him off. Bye, Andy.